The corporate ink on the forensic audit smelled like burnt paper. Fiona sat in the glass-walled boardroom of Thorne Vance Logistics, her fingers pressing into the edge of a mahogany table. Across from her, the ledger columns did not balance. A sum of $25 million had vanished from the offshore transit accounts over 6 months, funneled into a shell company registered in Panama called the November Trust. This was not a standard case of embezzlement or creative accounting by a lazy executive. The money had been systematically stripped from the core operating capital, leaving the firm on the verge of total collapse. Fiona looked up as the door clicked open. Her business partner, Dominic, walked in carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He smiled, his face perfectly calm, his tailored gray suit immaculate. He had been her closest friend since university, the man who gave the toast at her wedding, and the person she trusted with her life. He placed a cup in front of her. He asked if the quarterly numbers were ready for the board meeting tomorrow morning. Fiona closed the file slowly, keeping her hands perfectly still on the leather cover. Fiona transitions from professional confusion to cold, paralyzing terror as she realizes her closest ally is actively destroying their life's work. "The numbers are fine, Dominic," she said, watching his eyes narrow slightly as she slid the real audit report deep into her leather briefcase. Fiona did not go home that evening. Instead, she drove to a quiet petrol station on the outskirts of London, the rain drumming a steady beat against her windscreen. Her phone vibrated in the cup holder, displaying a text message from an unknown, encrypted number. The message contained a single locker number at the station and a digital combination code. Someone inside the firm knew about the missing $25 million, and they were terrified. She walked through the damp air, her heels clicking against the concrete, and unlocked the small metal door. Inside lay a single black flash drive wrapped in a page torn from an old shipping log. Back in her car, she plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen flashed to life, revealing scanned copies of private messages between Dominic and an external legal firm. As she scrolled through the text threads, her breath caught. They weren't discussing shipping routes, fuel costs, or corporate acquisition. They were discussing a specific date from 5 years ago, the night the company's founding chairman, Alistair, died in a hit-and-run accident. The shock of corporate theft mutates into a sickening suspicion that her mentor's death was planned. The final document on the drive was a signed agreement allocating the stolen millions to a private account marked "Final Settlement, Silent Partner." The next morning, the Thorne Vance boardroom felt like a courtroom. Dominic commanded the presentation, speaking smoothly about expansion and digital transformation while Fiona watched him from the end of the table. Every smile he gave the investors felt like a physical blow. She knew the $25 million audit would go public within 48 hours if she didn't file the regulatory disclosure. During the lunch break, Dominic left his phone and car keys on his desk to attend a quick meeting downstairs. Fiona slipped into his office, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't touch his computer. Instead, she retrieved a small, magnetic GPS tracking device from her pocket and walked out to the executive car park. She attached the device deep within the rear wheel well of Dominic's black saloon. If he was moving that volume of cash to a silent partner, he would have to meet them face-to-face before the board meeting concluded the following day. She returned to her desk just as Dominic walked back into the corridor. Fiona moves from a passive investigator to an active hunter, shedding her grief to embrace calculated defiance. Dominic picked up his keys, glanced out the window toward the car park, and smiled directly at her. At 11:42 p.m., Fiona's phone beeped. The tracking application showed Dominic's car moving away from his suburban home, heading south toward the old industrial docks along the Thames. She started her own engine, keeping her headlights switched off until she cleared her street. The rain had returned, blurring the taillights of the few cars on the road. She followed the digital blue on her dashboard, keeping a distance of 3 miles. The docks were deserted at this hour, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and abandoned warehouses that Thorne Vance had stopped using years ago. She parked her vehicle behind a crumbling brick wall and walked the remaining distance on foot. The air smelled of salt and wet iron. Up ahead, Dominic's saloon stood idling near the edge of the pier, its headlights illuminating a second vehicle. A silver Mercedes. A tall figure stepped out of the shadow of the warehouse to meet Dominic. The isolation of the docks amplifies Fiona's vulnerability, turning her professional crusade into a dangerous game of survival. The silver car's door opened, and the interior light revealed the face of the silent partner. Clara, Alistair's surviving widow. Fiona pressed her back against the cold, corrugated metal of a container, holding her breath. The wind carried fragments of their sharp, clipped conversation across the concrete. Dominic handed Clara a heavy leather document folder. Clara did not look inside. She simply held it against her coat like a prize. "The audit is complete, Dominic," Clara said, her voice cutting through the wind. "Fiona knows something is wrong. She hasn't signed off on the quarterly tax returns." Dominic dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand. He assured her that Fiona was predictable, that she would focus entirely on the missing money without ever looking at the original police file from 5 years ago. He stated that the final payment would transfer to Panama by noon tomorrow, and then the company would file for bankruptcy, burying the past forever. Clara nodded, stating that 5 years of waiting for Alistair's estate to clear was long enough. The realization that Alistair's own wife conspired with Dominic to eliminate him destroys Fiona's remaining faith in professional loyalty. "If Fiona becomes an issue," Dominic said quietly, "we handle her the exact same way we handled the old man." Fiona slipped away into the darkness before they finished speaking. Her boots splashed in the puddles, but the sound was swallowed by the crashing river waves. Stealing his money, they were preparing to declare him mentally unfit to manage his own affairs so he could never legally challenge the transfer of the $500,000. A wave of pure horror washes over Alistair as he looks at the legal execution of his own identity. The burner phone in the box suddenly illuminated with an incoming call from Dr. Fiona. Alistair answered the phone, but remained silent. "Clara, it's Fiona," the voice said hurriedly. "The final medication dosage is ready for collection. If he takes it with his evening tea for 3 days, the blood test will perfectly mimic the cognitive disorientation we need for the court hearing on Friday. Are we still on track?" Alistair hung up without speaking. He carefully put everything back under the floorboard and walked back to the main house, his heart pounding a steady rhythm of survival. When he entered the kitchen, Clara was waiting. She smiled warmly, a smile that now looked like the grin of a predator. A steaming mug of chamomile tea sat on the counter. "You look exhausted, darling," she said, pushing the mug toward him. "Drink this. It will help you sleep. You've been so forgetful lately. I really think you need the rest." Alistair looked down at the dark liquid. He knew exactly what was inside it. If he refused, she would know he suspected something. If he drank it, he would lose his mind. "Thanks, love," he said, picking it up. "Let me just grab my reading glasses from the study first." Bitter resentment fills him as he looks at the poison offered by the person who promised to love him forever. He stepped into the hallway, quickly poured the tea into a potted plant, and filled the mug with identical plain water from the bathroom tap. For the next 2 days, Alistair played the victim perfectly. He stumbled over his words, pretended to forget where he put his keys, and stared blankly at walls whenever Clara entered the room. He watched her through his eyelashes as she smiled to herself, typing furious updates on her hidden banking application. She believed the medication was working. She believed she had won. On Thursday evening, Callum arrived at the house. He walked right through the front door without knocking, carrying a leather briefcase. Alistair sat on the sofa, acting slumped and vacant. "He's completely out of it," Clara whispered to Callum, standing just a few feet away from Alistair. "The doctor is signing the emergency conservatorship papers tomorrow morning. The $500,000 is safe in the offshore account, and the house deed clears next week." Callum laughed, walking over to Alistair and patting his shoulder roughly. "Unlucky, big brother. Some people just aren't built for business. Don't worry, we'll find a nice, quiet facility for you." Alistair kept his eyes glassy, staring straight ahead, letting them savor their absolute victory. Alistair swallows his immense pride and anger, feeding their arrogance to ensure their eventual downfall. Callum opened his briefcase on the coffee table, revealing the final legal transfer documents that required Alistair's witnessed thumbprint. "I'll get the ink pad from the kitchen," Clara said, her voice filled with triumph. While her back was turned, Alistair shifted his gaze slightly toward the hallway mirror. In the reflection, he could see the small, hidden nanny cam he had installed in the bookcase 2 days prior. It was recording everything in high definition, Callum boasting about the theft, Clara discussing the medication, and the paperwork lying open on the table. But Alistair had one more card to play. He needed an independent witness who wasn't a hidden camera. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the quiet house like a siren. Callum frowned, instantly closing the briefcase. "Who the hell is that at this hour?" "I don't know," Clara said, her confidence wavering for a fraction of a second. She walked to the front door and pulled it open. Standing on the porch was a tall, stern-looking elderly woman holding a folder of her own. It was Esther, Alistair's maternal grandmother and the primary trustee of the family's remaining estate. "Hello, Clara," Esther said coldly, stepping inside without an invitation. "I received an anonymous tip that my grandson was being medically abused in his own home." Alistair feels a surge of intense relief, mixed with sharp anticipation as the traps begin to spring around his tormentors. Esther looked directly at Callum, her eyes narrowing. "And you're supposed to be in police custody for fraud in Edinburgh." Callum's face drained of color. "Grandmother, you don't understand. Alistair is sick. We're just trying to help him manage his affairs." "Silence," Esther snapped, walking into the living room. She looked at Alistair, who maintained his vacant expression for just a moment longer before slowly straightening his spine. His posture changed completely. The confusion vanished from his eyes, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. "I'm perfectly fine, Esther," Alistair said, his voice firm and clear. Clara gasped, stepping back against the wall. "But the tea. You've been drinking it for days." "The houseplants didn't appreciate it, but I certainly did," Alistair replied smoothly. Esther slammed her folder onto the table right next to Callum's briefcase. "I brought something else, Alistair. Since you asked me to investigate Vane Holdings, I dug into their financial backers. Callum isn't working with Clara just for the money. They have a much older connection." Esther pulled out a certified birth certificate and a DNA profile from a private archive. The absolute destruction of Alistair's remaining illusions about his past life as a dark family secret is laid bare. The document revealed that Clara's maiden name was a lie. She was the biological daughter of the man who had ruined their father 20 years ago. The room descended into a freezing silence. Clara's mask completely shattered, her eyes darting toward the door. "This changes nothing," Callum blustered, trying to grab his briefcase. "The money is already in the Cayman account. It's offshore. You can't touch it, Alistair. The house belongs to Vane Holdings now. You're still broke." Alistair stood up calmly, smoothing down his shirt. "You really should have checked the router logs, Clara. Or maybe you forgot that I run a logistics firm that specializes in digital supply chain security." He pulled out his own, to know how she had found the archive files, screaming that Alistair was ruining the company anyway and deserved what happened to him. The corporate facade had completely vanished, leaving only a desperate, cornered criminal. The door opened, and the officers entered, followed closely by the firm's legal counsel and the chairman of the board. The investors watched from the corridor in complete shock as Dominic was instructed to place his hands on the desk. He turned back to Fiona, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He pleaded with her to tell them it was a misunderstanding, reminding her of their years of friendship and everything they had built together. Fiona simply stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked past him without a word. The false bond of their long friendship officially dissolves, leaving Fiona feeling light, unburdened, and entirely vindicated. The metal handcuffs clicked loudly into place around Dominic's wrists, the sound echoing through the glass office. By 5 p.m., the story had broken across every financial news network in London. Television crews stood outside the Thorne and Vance building, their lights cutting through the evening gloom. The news anchors detailed the freezing of the $25 million and the reopening of the murder investigation into Alastair's death. 3 miles away, Clara was arrested at her luxury home in Chelsea while attempting to board a private vehicle bound for Heathrow Airport. The police found her bags packed with offshore banking tokens and bearer bonds. The entire conspiracy had unraveled in less than 2 hours. Fiona stood in the quiet archive room of the office, watching the live news broadcast on her tablet. The company name was tarnished, but the truth was finally clean. The legacy of her mentor would no longer be defined by the lies of his killers. The public exposure provides a deep sense of relief, washing away years of lingering doubt and corporate deceit. A news reporter on screen announced that both Dominic and Clara were being held without bail on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. A week later, the boardroom was quiet. The old board had been dissolved, and Fiona had been appointed as the sole managing director of the restructured logistics firm. The $25 million had been returned to the primary operating accounts, securing the jobs of hundreds of employees who had no idea how close they had come to ruin. Dominic's office was empty, the furniture cleared, leaving only clean squares on the carpet where his shelves had once stood. Fiona sat at her new desk, holding a single-framed photograph of herself, Alastair, and Dominic from the day the company went public. She carefully removed the frame, took out the photo, and placed it into a shredder. The machine hummed, destroying the last visual remnant of a betrayal that had cost 5 years of pain. Fiona embraces the finality of her victory, recognizing that justice requires cutting away the past completely. She watched the paper strips fall into the bin, leaving her desk completely clear for the first time in months. The evening sun broke through the London clouds, casting long, golden lines across the Thames. Fiona walked down to the pier where she had tracked Dominic just a week ago. The old warehouses looked less threatening now, just empty structures waiting for something new to be built in their place. She stood at the water's edge, holding a small brass key that Alastair had given her when she first became a junior partner. It was a token of trust from a man who had believed in her potential before anyone else. She tossed the key into the river, watching it catch the light once before disappearing into the deep, dark water. The weight that had settled on her shoulders 5 years ago was gone. She turned her back on the river and walked toward the city lights, her stride steady and her mind entirely at peace. Fiona achieves complete emotional liberation, stepping out from the shadow of murder and corporate greed into a bright, independent future. Some people kill to protect their wealth, but they always forget that the truth costs absolutely nothing to expose.